from the headquarters of Tell Us Your English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. Mexico says it won't allow members of a migrant caravan from Honduras to enter its territory unless they have the correct immigration papers. About 1,000 migrants set off on Saturday, heading for the border with the United States. The group has now grown to some 3,000. On Monday, they reached the border with Guatemala, where they were blocked by Guatemalan police. The caravan was organized as a protest against U.S. immigration policies.
There's a lot of corruption here in Honduras. We want work, but there is none. We want land to plant bananas, plantains, beans, but there isn't any. We need to migrate to another country. In the hospitals, there's no security, there's nothing. Our patients die.
They treat us pretty bad. The military, the immigration and police officers were not respectful. And we are asking the government of Guatemala and Mexico to open their doors so we can enter with no problems. Because we are not going to rob or kill, but we are going for a better life for all our families and ourselves.
We are going because Honduras is making us go. Why? Because Honduras is one of the poorest countries. We have a government that doesn't support all of the poor people. We have to flee, fleeing from our country. We have to be able to get ahead, and that's not happening.
Staying in Honduras, the start of the trial of the 8 people accused of killing Berta Caceres has been suspended for the second time. Her family has filed a new objection against the judges in the case. Berta Caceres was an environmental activist and indigenous leader. She was killed in 2016 by gunmen who entered her house. Her family and community suspect the management of an energy company of ordering her murder because Caceres had prevented the construction of a hydroelectric project by the company.
We do not accept a half justice or arbitrary legal processes, but we demand real justice for Berta Caceres, my mother, but also for the Honduran people who, in order to survive, they have to leave the country.
The court has been challenged, the court in charge of the hearing has been challenged, and so we can continue the trial with a court that has a question of substantial as this petition for removal.
We go to our correspondent Gilda Silvestrucci with the latest from Tegucigalpa.
The
lawyers argue that there has been arbitrary behavior in this case by both the Supreme Court and the public prosecutors. So we'll have to wait. But if this goes on too long, the period of preventative detention for the suspected killers could expire. They would then walk free without any hearing taking place.
Farmers in Mexico have gathered to demand that agreements reached with the government be put into effect. Demonstrators from all over the country arrived at the Ministry of Finance to protest against the lack of resources. Leaders have said that next year's agricultural production is in danger because of the lack of government support. Our correspondent in Mexico City, Pablo Perez, has the details.
Social movements and campesine organizations from 15 states are outside the Ministry of Finance. They were organized under the movement called Land for Everyone, demanding the fulfillment of the agreements made with the outgoing president Enrique Peña Nieto. They said they received some economic resources at the beginning of the year. However, after a couple of months, they stopped receiving help from the government and ran out of resources. There are about 2,800 social and health programs that are currently suspended due to the lack of public funds. These programs were aimed at helping the campesino communities across the nation. Several campesino leaders said that next year's crops are at stake, jeopardizing Mexico's food production. They will continue demonstrating until the government fulfill their demands.
We thank Pablo Perez for that report. 9 out of 10 Mexicans believe that their country is violent for women. According to a survey published by the Center for Public Opinion, 23% of Mexicans think women suffer violence because they allow it. Another 20% think violence against women is due to hypermasculinity, and 18% think it's influenced by values in education. 671 women were killed in 2017 alone, according to official figures. Earlier, we spoke exclusively to the chief negotiator of Colombia's National Liberation Army, Pablo Beltran, who joined us from Havana about the possibility of resuming peace talks with the government of Iván Duque.
We have to say that unfortunately Duque has allowed the military forces to somehow be involved in the negotiation table. And he said to them, in my first 100 days of government, you should carry out a military offensive against the National Liberation Army's leadership. And that once that showed results, they could think of resuming talks. We know the government is carrying a military offensive against the National Liberation Army, and depending on those results, thinking of returning to the dialogue table.
Beltran also said that the military onslaught by Duque's government seeks to push the negotiation in favor of their own interests.
In all territories where there have been ELN units, there has been extreme militarization. Also, there is extreme militarization in FARC areas. Paramilitary groups have spread, and that has had a great impact on communities. Also, a fumigation plan has begun, where glyphosate is being used against coca farming communities. There's an order by President Trump to threaten the Colombian government if it does not carry out these fumigations. Also, the Colombian government has proceeded to carry out assassinations of social leaders and human rights defenders. All of that has escalated the conflict against the ELN under instructions of the United States.
Hundreds of supporters of Peru's jailed opposition leader, Keiko Fujimori, have marched in Lima to demand her release. She's been in jail since last Wednesday, accused of money laundering. Marchers also expressed their support for her convicted father, the former president, Alberto Fujimori, whose pardon was overturned earlier this month. He was serving 25 years in jail for human rights abuses during the 1990s.
I'm joining the march, like thousands of Peruvians who are coming here today, not just from Lima, but from different parts of the country, to show their support, demanding the freedom of Keiko Sofia Fujimori.
They took away Alberto Fujimori's pardon because of ill will, for revenge. And that's why we have come here, with heart, with love in our hands, to support the Fujimoris.
The Peruvian Congress has closed the case to dismiss the public prosecutor Pedro Chavarri. With 17 votes for and 9 votes against, Congress has rejected his dismissal. Earlier, social organizations demanded his removal in a protest. Demonstrators said now the investigations into Keiko Fujimori and others in power could be at risk. We take a short break now and we'll have more news in a minute.
Queremos verdad, reparación integral, pero sobre todo justicia, pero justicia social.
How many ways there are to tell a story? The different perspectives of our nations are on Telesur documentaries. Sundays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has a debate on the National Development Plan in Caracas. Maduro was accompanied by Vice President Delcy Rodriguez and several governors to discuss the economic plan. Rodriguez said the forum will enhance productive capabilities. Maduro said they will work for the development of the country, focusing on agriculture, industry, and the pharmaceutical sector.
This is a perfect event because we have come here to celebrate our commitment with the most important task for our country, the main goal, which is the economic recovery, development, and prosperity of Venezuela.
The sculpture of El Kaleidoscopio, Spanish for kaleidoscope, has returned to Venezuela. Venezuelan Culture Minister Ines de Villegas tweeted that it returned along with 86 Venezuelan migrants from Argentina as part of the Return to the Homeland program. The piece by the Venezuelan artist Carlos Cruz Diaz had been placed in a park in Buenos Aires for years. Ecuador's Confederation of Indigenous and Peasant Peoples continue to fight for their land. Their members have protested under the National Agrarian Strike in the capital, Quito, to the presidential palace, but were not allowed to approach the premises. Eventually, they met with government officials who told them their concerns were being addressed.
If the government is concerned about promoting a policy of agrarian revolution, then it will require serious transformation that will entail the delivery of land, which means really saying no to the attempts to revoke the land.
Approximately 21 properties nationwide are at risk. Many are on the coast, but just as my colleague said, it was a tenacious fight. It was a battle which came paid for their lives. The biggest thing is that the current government does not know how much we suffered just to get the land which is rightful ours. It's taking multiple strikes and other efforts, but thank God it was a cheat. Now, this current government wants to reverse this. It does not make sense.
El Salvador is still celebrating its first saint after Pope Francis canonized the late Salvadorian Archbishop Oscar Romero. Thousands of Salvadorians witnessed the ceremony, which took place in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City.
Thousands filled the Metropolitan Cathedral in San Salvador to see firsthand Oscar Romero's elevation to sainthood by Pope Francis. Romero, who had often denounced repression and poverty, was gunned down on March 24, 1980, in his own church.
We are encouraged by our faith to take on a new path and take Monsignor Romero as an example of strength to face anything that comes our way. He showed us how to be brave, to be courageous indeed.
Worshippers also took part in a pilgrimage through the city's streets, in remembrance of Romero's fight for justice and for the poor, and how he stood up to the powers that be in the 1970s.
He stood up against the oligarchy and the powerful groups in the country. I don't think recognizing Monsignor Romero as a saint opens up wounds of the past. On the contrary, I think he needs to be recognized as the saint of the people.
And just before the canonization in Vatican City, a mass was offered to commemorate Monsignor Romero.
He was killed while he was holding a mass. He received death threats before he was murdered. Death squads placed the bomb under the altar of the Church of Sagrado Corazon. Those in power didn't like him at all.
The canonization of Monsignor Oscar Romero brings hope to the people, but now they are demanding the authorities prosecute those responsible for his murder.
The Caribbean community is confronting climate change from the perspective of its devastating effect on small islands. Speaking on behalf of CARICOM at the UN Committee on Climate Change, Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson lamented the state of things.
As the Prime Minister of Barbados spoke in the General Assembly, that island, my island, was underwater in some cases, chest high. And I'm not talking about the chest of people short like myself. 2 weeks ago, there was an earthquake off the shores of Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Dominica. And just last week, Haiti experienced yet another devastating earthquake when its citizens were still trying to recover from the destructive and traumatic earthquake of 2010. We contribute the least to climate change, but we are simultaneously the most at risk from its negative effects and the least equipped to withstand and adapt to the social, environmental, and economic impacts of climate change.
Canada is set to legalize marijuana on Wednesday, replacing the black market industry. A whole new industry is being set up in record time, with producers rushing to buy agricultural or horticultural greenhouses to grow cannabis plants. Though many welcome legalization of recreational use, some are reflecting on those who have suffered when marijuana was illegal. The heart of the Dominican Republic diaspora in the U.S. lies in New York City, and that's exactly where the 11th annual Dominican Book Fair recently got underway.
Organized around the theme Reading Opens Horizons, this year the festival is dedicated to the late Dominican intellectual, historian, and former president, Juan Bosch.
This fair has more than 100 free events for Dominican people. There are about 1 million Dominicans here in New York. A lot of people came here from different countries far away, like Spain, for example.
This event pays tribute to one of the most relevant individuals in Dominican history and literature, the professor Juan Bosch.
We share books from here, and at the same time we can know our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. We can see not only the fruits of their labor, but the conditions they sometimes work under. We share a common identity, and this is an unifying experience for all Dominicans in the diaspora.
It's not just books. There are lectures, cinema, theater, and children's literature. They are all a part of the cultural exhibition.
Dominican people have a strong presence in the United States. So, this is a sort of cultural meeting point for us.
More than 80 authors, scholars, and literary giants have taken part in this cultural event.
They are giving us courage and the opportunity to show the world. What we feel and write, what we put on the books, is what we feel.
Paintings, drawings, and photography were on exhibit. They are the works of talented Dominican visual artists living in the U.S. They closed a chapter on this cultural event showcasing the talent of the Dominican diaspora in New York.
Argentina striker and football icon Lionel Messi will be the star in a new Cirque du Soleil show next year. Messi says it is incredible that he has inspired the internationally known circus show. Every year, Cirque du Soleil has shows featuring different cultural themes. It employs more than 4,000 people, including 1,300 artists from almost 50 countries, including Argentina's Messi. That should be fascinating. We'll take another short break now. World News is next.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has met with the Saudi Arabian King Salman about the disappearance of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. As international pressure grew, U.S. President Donald Trump sent Pompeo to discuss the matter with the Saudi king. Trump and King Salman have shared amicable relations and support each other on foreign relations. U.S. resident and Washington Post columnist Khashoggi went missing after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in early October and was never seen again in public. The Islamic State in Nigeria has reportedly executed an aid worker who was kidnapped last March. According to local media, the Red Cross nurse was shot dead after a deadline imposed by the armed group expired. The 24-year-old was kidnapped with 2 other medical workers, one of them a midwife who was executed last September. The Red Cross is awaiting a final report before they can confirm the news. The Gambia has launched a special commission to investigate cases of violence under its ousted dictator. The commission will hold witness hearings for the victims of the 22-year dictatorship of Yahya Jammeh, especially on the subject of gender-based violence. It will advise on the prosecution of perpetrators and offer financial compensation to victims. It includes 4 women, and members are chosen from the main regions of the Gambia, its 5 main ethnic groups, and 2 religions.
There shall be no witch hunt against any person or communities for the excesses of the previous regime, while at the same time reassuring victims and their families that justice will be dispensed through due process of law, respect for the rights of all Gambians, and in a fair, transparent, and stable environment.
The number of Yemenis on the brink of famine could rise to 12 million due to escalating war and a deepening economic crisis. The United Nations says it feared millions were struggling to make ends meet would succumb to severe hunger and disease. Saudi Arabia and its allies imposed a blockade on the country for several weeks as Yemen imports 90% of its food. The UN is scaling up its emergency food and nutrition aid to reach those affected every month. Our correspondent in Egypt, Hisham Wanus, has the latest.
Yemen is experiencing one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in the world. According to the United Nations, the country is on the brink of the worst famine in 100 years. The situation has been escalating since Saudi Arabia and the UAE started their bombardment in 2015 in support of President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi against Houthi fighters who have taken over vast swaths of the country. The conflict has killed around 2,200 children and endangered 5 million children who face starvation. The bombing has devastated civilians and infrastructure. There is a blockade on the main port of Hodeida, which was crucial for the import of food, commercial and humanitarian goods. The situation has also caused a serious health crisis with the rise in epidemics such as cholera. Yemen suffers from a lack of medicine, doctors and hospitals. The United Nations says that they have lost a war against starvation because they can't carry out humanitarian work due to the lack of security. And as of now, there's no end in sight as prices soar and the bombing continues.
Palestinians and activists clashed with Israeli forces in the village of Khan al-Amar as residents feared a demolition of the village. At least 4 people were detained and 1 Palestinian remains in custody. Israeli forces are expected to remove more than 2,000 Palestinian residents from the area. And thousands of residents in Tibet are in temporary shelters after a landslide struck on Thursday morning. The first batch of disaster relief supplies has arrived to the area. Workers have been striving to restore power supplies and telecommunication services. Medicine and sanitary emergency supplies are being provided and 32 health service stations are being set up near relocation sites.
The autonomous region has allocated 570 million yuan for disaster relief work, including 240 million yuan of subsidies to victims and 260 million yuan to be used for road repair in disaster-hit areas. The local government has assembled over 60 emergency medicines and other sanitary emergency supplies and has set up 32 health service stations near the relocation sites.
A team of university students in Beijing, China has developed a self-driving bicycle. Using a steering control method, the driverless bike can go forward, turn right and left and walk at or ride at different speeds. The project aims to supply a GPS system to the bike for it to ride automatically according to the planned route and without human supervision.
China is a great cycling country. With the progress of technology, our requirements for bicycle applications have been raised. We hoped the bicycle can carry water and equipment for fashion, allowing young people when they are exercising outdoors.
And the work by the late astrophysicist Stephen Hawking has been presented by his family in London. In the book titled Brief Answers to Big Questions, Hawking approaches questions such as the existence of God and time traveling. His sons and daughter helped to finish the British scientist's work following his death in March 2018.
Well, he was deeply worried that at a time when the challenges that present themselves are global and that they need us to come together and work together and cooperate, that we were becoming increasingly local in our thinking, and that at a time when we should be calling for unity, we were becoming more and more fractured and divided.
We've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. And for our viewers in Africa, remember you can watch us on Starstat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. So you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you for watching.